Let's talk about animating third-person characters like this one. If you have had luck with animation libraries in Unreal, then congrats, you can just skip this video. I never have, for a couple of reasons. First is, I don't make those kinds of games. Those are all action libraries, and I don't create action games. Second, I use an unusual bone structure that's often incompatible or skews pretty badly. And third, I like to have my animations work for my characters specifically, for the things they're doing in their specific world, and I just can't get that from a library, so I handcraft most of my animations. Problem is, you need a lot of animations. If you've ever opened up a library of animations, you've found hundreds of animations named things like turn left, spin left, walk turn left, walk spin left, run turn left, run spin left, crouch turn left, crouch spin left, and on and on and on. Yeah, if you're making all your own animations, you got to make those, right? That's miserable. Let me show you, right? If I've got this run, this is an awful run. I made it in 10 minutes. It's never going to get to the final game. It's worthless, right? But I can use it for prototyping. So I'll make a lot of my early game stuff with a terrible run, and then when I feel like I'm having a day where I don't suck, I'll make a run animation that doesn't suck. I can just slot it in, replace it. It's that easy, right? Except I have to do all of those transition animations. I need my character to be able to transition from walking to running, or from running to jumping, or any other thing we want, from running right to running left. I need to be able to have those animations because otherwise the character won't feel right. There'll be a very snap, 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 snap feel to everything I do, and I won't get a feel for how the character actually feels to play. So I spend days doing that for a temporary animation that I plan to replace. And then I do it again when I get the real animation. And then I have a second character that runs a little bit different because I got a different personality, and I have to do it again. And again, and again, and again, and again. And it's just the worst. Good news, you don't need to do any of that shit. Unreal has a bunch of tools, some of which are quite recent, which will help you to stretch your coverage. You can do a lot of things without dedicated animations. Everything you've been watching me do, how many animations do you think I've used? And how complicated do you think my controllers are? I have 2 animations, walk and run. That's it. I have some poses, but the poses are really, really easy. I'll show you later. It takes like a minute to make a pose. So this is a setup where I am stretching 2 animations to create almost an entire character. Obviously, it's still got some stuff I'd like to add in, like, you know, talking animations and stuff. But for the core mobility, this is almost usable. For an indie game, sure. Obviously, if you're going to do something realistic, you're going to want some more extra stuff going on. But I think that in an indie game, this is believable. So, how am I doing it? Well, obviously, we start at the animation blueprint. Here it is. This is not a complicated blueprint. It's not a complicated character. But there are 5 techniques that I'm using in this blueprint. You should already know 2 of them, which we'll cover very, very quickly here. The first is a state machine. If you don't know how animation state machines work, you should. Everything you do is a state. And so much of what you do is transferring between states. If you've ever seen someone with all of those extra coverage animations and all those transition animations, they'll often have states like pivot left or something else, and you'll be thinking, oh, that's awfully niche, right? That's like, really? Do you need a whole state for that? And the answer is usually, yeah. If you're trying to play an animation, you probably need a state. So in our case, we've only got 3 states. Nothing releases with just 3 states. If I actually make a game with this setup, it's going to be like 15, 30 states. There's really no limit on the number of states, and you can nest state machines. So even though one state machine might be simple, it might have another state machine inside it. In this case, we have the normal, which is our 2 animations, and then we've got falling and recovering, which are poses. But I need to play those poses, so they have states. Now the thing is, you almost never see these poses as poses. They don't really freeze. If you fall for a long time, sure, but normally you don't see these poses as held rigid poses. Instead, we blend them together. These transitions automatically blend between these states, and we can tweak the parameters to whatever we want. So recovering is not something you stick to. You transition from the falling pose into the recovering pose, and then you transition from the recovering pose into the main walking poses. So they have their own states, and we use the transitions between the states to animate them. That's how we can use poses to get coverage. If our animations do not need to be delicate or intricate or actually animated, we can just use a pose and then take advantage of the transfer between the states to get the animations out of it. Another thing we can do, the second thing you should already know, is blending spaces together, or blending animations together using blend spaces. There are lots of ways to blend animations, transitions between states, blend animations. There are dedicated blending animation nodes, and of course, there's blend spaces. In our case, we're taking the speed that we're running and we're passing it into a blend space to tell whether we are stopped, playing the idle pose, whether we're walking, or whether we're running. Now, the thing is, what kind of poses you can blend and what kind of animations you can blend will vary dramatically based on the poses and animations you have. Some blend okay and some do not. Typically, different speeds of walking don't blend, and that's definitely the case here. Our walking animation and our running animation do not blend. If we wanted to go 50% walking and 50% running, we would have what I call Scooby-Doo feet, which is where the slower walking animation and the faster running animation compete over who has control over the feet. It's awful. It looks awful. So we have taken the extraordinary advanced technique of not dwelling on it and moving through the transition as quickly as possible. This is like 10 frames. The player is going to be stuck here for 10 frames. This is max walk speed. Max run speed is way over on the right somewhere. This is not very much time at all. So if we do get Scooby-Doo feet, it's going to be like just a blurb. Watch. Here's us walking, and then we're going to transition to run. And you see that little Scooby-Doo foot moment? Back to walking. So every time we do that, there's a chance that we'll get Scooby-Doo feet, depending on our timing. There, see that? Scooby-Doo feet. So it's one of those things where if we move past it, nobody's going to care. Obviously, if you plan to do really high-quality, super nice animations, you're going to need something more advanced, like a stride match. I'm not going to go into that, but those are available. Those tools do exist. For us, though, we're just going to move through it as quickly as possible, and nobody's going to notice. Easy as that, right? Those are two techniques that you should already know. You should already know states and blend spaces. Those are going to be the core building blocks that everything about your character animation is built around. Everything else is flavor. Everything else is helpers. So these are the two things you must know. Now let's get to some of the stuff you might not know yet. First is, what is this orientation warping? What's that? All right, edit, plugins, animation. There are 3 animation plugins worth having, and those are Locomotion Library, which I don't have enabled because I'm not using it. That will do stride matching and stuff. Down here we've got the Animation Modifier Library, which defaults to on, so you've already got it, and the Animation Warping, which defaults to off, so you need to turn it on. We're using the Animation Warping here. This Orientation Warping is just a node that you set up. There's nothing for you to do here. And so what that does is it turns us around. So if I want to walk left, you see how my hips move left, we spin around. We don't just move like a top. We actually have some grace to our movements, and it feels a little bit more natural. Obviously, we could also add in a lot of other fluff if we wanted. For example, we could have the head look behind us as we turn and stuff like that, but that's all just more stuff that we can decide whether we want to do or not. Either way, this is a much more valuable tool than you might think. We are rotating our character to face in the heading that we're going. So if I press right, the character actually rotates to move right. It's a basic character. You just toggle something in the character movement thing on their character. But you don't have to. If you wanted to have your character always face downstream, and always look down camera. You can use this same setup and it will help your strafe. So you don't have to have a strafe animation, you can have a walk animation where your hips walk to one side. And that can be quite helpful. So we are not going to worry too much about getting all those fill animations because we can just use our orientation warping to turn. And it feels like it's alive rather than it's a top. Now, one of the issues that we are going to have with this is that it will pop. And we also need to know what to feed it. It takes some data that's not entirely standard. So let's talk about those. What's this locomotion angle and why does it say thread safe? All right, so we want to talk about thread safe data. Sounds exciting, right? How do we get our data? Well, a lot of people put it here in the event graph. I don't recommend that. Obviously, the event graph is good for begin play stuff, but if you want to get data every frame, I recommend the Blueprint thread safe update animation function. You don't have to memorize the name. It's just in this dropdown right here. This function has all the same features that a normal update function has, but it's thread safe, meaning that it runs without taking up your main thread's time. You can do all sorts of math and calculation in here that won't choke up your game. So if you have 100,000 characters or whatever, you're not going to slow down your whole game by doing all of those calculations in the main thread. The main difference between this method and the other method is the accessors that you use. So if we type in property, we have these property accessors. These are fantastic. They're actually better than the normal way, in my opinion, because we can just get whatever we want here. Owner component, get cloth max distance scale if we need it. Oh, are we getting collision profile names out of this? Let's grab it. There it is. We now have it. There's no digging. We don't have to like drag lines and then get a property and so on and so forth. We can just set it up and it works. It's thread safe immediately. Now, I am not 100% sure that I have optimized this properly, but that's not really the point in this case because we can always optimize it later as long as our stuff is in the right basic spot. And in this case, I recommend the Blueprint thread safe update animation function rather than the normal update animation, just because it's more future-proof and it's a little faster. Now, how about that thing that the anim graph ate? What did it want? Locomotion angle? Well, here it is, locomotion angle. We get the current acceleration of the character movement object. The character movement is a thing on the character. It's a class on the character, and we grab it, and we get the current acceleration. This current acceleration is not a physics acceleration because the character movement system doesn't care about physics. If we're running down a slope or sliding down a slide or falling off a cliff, that animation, those physics things won't affect our acceleration. This is only the acceleration that the controller is requesting, whether it's a player or an AI. And that means that we can use this to determine which direction we are trying to move. And then, of course, we can get a direction we are actually facing. Then we can use this easy peasy node that already exists, and we're done. It's that easy. Just this node automatically gets what we need. It gives us a number from -180 to 180 to determine, how left and how right we're trying to move. And we can then just feed that straight into our orientation warping, and it will warp us to move left or right. Boom. Now in this case, I have also put in this alpha weight. There is a problem with orientation warping at very small angles. This won't be noticeable if you don't move to face the direction you're traveling, but since we are moving to face the direction we're traveling, we do need to worry about orientation warping affecting us at very low angles, like 1 degree or half a degree. When that happens, you can get popping. Your hips will go pop, 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 and that'll look really weird. So we just nerf it. The closer we get to 0 rotation, the weaker the orientation warping is applied, and we don't get any popping. 45 is probably a bit much. We could probably bring that down to 15 and it would work fine. It's up to you. As to this component to local stuff, this is automatic. You don't have to worry about it. If you are curious about what that means, feel free to look up a tutorial on that specifically. And remember that there's lots of other nodes we can put in here, like foot planting. Whatever you're trying to do, chances are very high that there is now a node to just do it. All right, now we're done with orientation warping. What's this? A post-process rig? Aw, you shouldn't have. My favorite. So, there are in fact 2 control rigs for this skeleton. You've already seen one of the control rigs. That's this bad boy over here. This is my pose control rig, where I can just change the pose of this character so that they, you know, face whatever direction I want them to face. No big deal. But that's not the only control rig I have. I also have a dedicated post-processing control rig. Why? What's the difference? Well, the post-processing control rig does all of the weird movements on curves. This stuff here. This is all my post-processing control rig. So let me show it to you. It's not that complicated, so hopefully you'll have no problem following along here. The posing rig, you've already seen that, and then here is our post-processing rig. Boom. So what do we do with our post-processing rig? Well, it looks pretty complicated. It's not that complicated though. So basically what we do is we find out the slope of the ground below our feet. So we are taking this root bone, which I somehow spelled with a capital O, and we are finding the bone contribution of the root bone, which we just go ahead and grab where the root bone is, and then we do a sphere trace. So if you've ever looked at the default third-person character, they do this same thing, but they do it on the feet. We do it on the root. And then we just say what the normal is. It's that easy. There's some other stuff we do to future-proof it, but basically we always just try and fetch the normal beneath our feet. And there's almost always a normal beneath our feet, unless we're falling. And if we're falling, we're doing something else, so that's fine. So, if we go back out to the forward solve here, you can see that we get this normal, and then we take an average over time so that we don't snap around too much. And then we just do a bunch of math. And this math might look a little complicated, but it's really not. This rotate to normal function just uses this from 2 vectors thing that lets us create an orientation that moves us from one vector to another. It's very straightforward once you start to look into it. I don't want to try and teach you this because this is all custom stuff for my particular need, which is we're on a boat and the boat is rocking. But this same setup, it can be used by anybody in any sort of system, and all we're really doing is applying all of these new rotation offsets to make our spine tilt properly. And then down here we do something with our shoulders, so we put our arms out a little bit so that we don't have hands that dip through our thighs or whatever. This sort of setup is going to be your custom stuff. This is when you are creating custom animation responses. I've done this for things like if you walk near a wall, we do a raycast to our right and to our left. If we find a wall, then we look at the wall and we lean away from it, or something similar, right? This is all of the stuff you can do to just give your character a little bit more interaction with the world without needing a custom animation. Of course, sky's the limit. Post-processing control rigs, you can do literally anything in them. So, you know, do whatever you want. That is a very, very powerful technique, and I don't know how many people use it. I imagine a lot of people do because it's part of the example that we see, but I find that people often don't look at those examples very carefully. The last thing I want to teach you is blend masks. So, that stretch animation that we do, which is obviously just a pose, this pose is applied to our animations in general, so we can have it happen to any animation. Now, normally what you would do is you would have this pose in its own state. So you would transfer into the state of having your arms up. But in this case, that would end up making an explosion of states because we wanted to be able to do it while we're running or while we're walking or while we're falling or whatever, right? Instead, what I've done is I've just attached it as a post-processing element. And I don't recommend that you do this very often, but it makes for a good tutorial on how to set this up, because you might notice that our legs are still doing their thing. Whether we're falling or running or whatever, our legs are still going off and doing whatever they want to do. We're using a blend mask, and this is something that is very obvious once you know what to look for, and impossible to find if you don't. So the way that blend masks work is, just pop open that, here it is. If we have something like a layered blend per bone, there's a lot of other things it also works in. We can set it up to use a blend mask. And then of course we have to create a blend mask. How do you create a blend mask, you might ask? Maybe you right click and then say new blend mask? Oh, you sweet summer child. No, the only way to create blend masks is to come over to the skeleton itself, which is somewhere in here. There it is. And then you have to come over here to this options menu, which is for toggling UI options. And then instead of toggling any of the UI options, you need to come over to blend profiles and create a new blend mask. Once you know it's here, it's not so bad, but wow, it's well hidden. In this case, the spinal tilt blend mask, we've got a lot of our bones set to 0, and then some of them set to 1, some of them set to 0.8, stuff like that. This means that any pose or animation we apply with this blend mask will be mostly applied to the upper body, especially the spine. That's kind of the point. So, this is extremely useful for layering your animations, and obviously animation layers are another topic which you can look up if you'd like, but this is good for, you know, mixing your animations on certain bones. You can specify this per bone if you want, but trust me, it gets super tedious to keep doing that over and over and over, especially if you have to change the weighting later and you've got it in 8 different places. So blend masks are great. The other thing you might have noticed is that this is more than just blend masks, it's also time blends and weight blends. In this case, we've got this smooth blend. I use this all over the place. You might not have even noticed it, but I have weighted it so that different things blend in at different rates. For example, the difference between running and walking blends at this rate. The way that we fall off blends at this rate. You know, fall off of a cliff. So the lower, in this case, the lower number, the faster things blend. So if we fall off a cliff, our hip blends super, super fast, and then eventually our butt follows along, right? So these are all things that blend at different speeds based on what I decided would look okay. You can look up more about this if you'd like. It does get a little complicated depending on whether you're using a time blend or a weight blend or whatever. So, you know, you can do a lot with this. But this setup is extremely valuable in helping to control when you're overlapping several different animations. And it's not uncommon to use an animation layer, which is a topic I didn't really get into, in order to do something like our state machine. We could just plug that into an animation layer, have that be its own animation layer, and then we could pull in like the upper body blend animation layer, whatever, you know, we could do. So there's a lot of options as to how you mix and match this stuff, but the point I'm trying to get at, this creates fake animations with nuance. If we're blending between two animations and we change our blend curve, some bones blend faster than others. So we can have the blending between those animations feel real. Like if we're blending between leaning right and leaning left as two different poses. If we just did it flat, then we would end up with just a weird little mechanical, it would just come up to a straight and then over to the other side. But if we changed how fast different bones blended, we could have our hips move first and our body follow behind, or vice versa. We could have our head snap to one side and then our body follows, just by changing the blend weights. We can even have double duty. We could have a pose that works on the full body in some situations, but is limited to certain bones in other situations. And we can do the same thing with animations. It doesn't have to be a pose. So if you have a couple of animations, sometimes those animations might be able to pull double duty if you mask out a bunch of the bones. We can always try to stretch the animations we have to cover whatever we're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to get at. we can make these animations move a lot more. We can make them do a lot more than we normally do. We don't need to create a million different coverage animations that do nothing besides turn left. Those aren't necessarily bad, but they're a real lot of work. Also, if you're wondering, this is the Blender free CC0 body. If you go to blender.org, you can find it if you are very, very good at figuring out where they have hidden all of their free stuff since they started their marketing campaign for Blender $9 a month studio or whatever it's called. I had to modify it a lot though because the head is very strange. Either way, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I don't think I forgot anything. Just do a quick little check here. Yeah, that's it. Then we just output it and we're done. See you around.